It's preparing. Well, good thing I started it, because apparently preparing takes a while. Okay, here we go. Excited to get started. Going to let everyone in here. Look at all the people jumping in this morning. So good to see everyone. Audrey, hello. Great to see you. Hi, Sharon. Good to see you. Awesome. Amy, hi, good to see you. And Sheila, look at it. Oh, it's wonderful. Good to see everybody on this Tuesday morning. I'm going to go ahead and let a few more people in. And Jim, we haven't seen Jim for quite a while. Dory, we're going to let Dory in here. So it's so good to see everyone. We love our Tuesday mornings. Excited to have our guest speaker here today. So we're going to give it a couple minutes while we let everyone get into the either via Zoom or we are live on some platforms. So that being said, you know, the Coffee Connection is all about networking, sharing, learning. And so this is an excellent time to take a minute and put your information into the chat. Say hello, meet and greet. Where are you from? This can be done also on all the live stream. So I want to let you know that we do have a few people trying to monitor the live streams. We're going to be having some Q&A time as well. And if we don't get to the Q&A or to your question, we'll try to circle back to it and reach out another time. But for right now, just reach out, say hello. Where are you from? It's good to meet everyone. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in the industry. Hi, Mark. Good to see you as well. Awesome. Gonna let a couple more people in here. I actually don't have any announcements for today. And so as soon as I let a couple more people, oh, I hear someone unmiking. Mark did. Are you just saying hello, Mark?
Yes.
Okay, hello. Good to hear you. All right, I'm gonna put you back on mute. All right.
Yeah, I'm putting myself on mute too.
Okay. Awesome. Well, see, it's good to hear from people. We like it. All right. I see something already popping in. Yeah. So Johnny Keeler, he had made a mention of Torrey Pines. So here in Southern California, we're dealing with all the wildfires, horrible weather, and our hearts and prayers goes out to everyone. There's also a drone incident at Torrey Pines. And so they've been looking for the person that hit I think it was a paraglider. Yes, Jim's saying yes. And so information is coming through on that. You know, it's just, we are all ambassadors for the industry. And this is a perfect example of how we can reach out and educate and inform people about flying right in situations like this. Yeah, and so really quick, I want to let a few more people in to our Zoom session here. I want to welcome everybody on our Tuesday morning. And I'm going to get started right away because we have an amazing guest speaker here today to share with us. We have Erin Roesler.
Yes.
See, and now I got it right, Roesler. And she is the Deputy Executive Director at Northern Plains UAS Test Site. So this is just really exciting in itself to me because I remember when back in 2017 when we even talked about the IPP and the test sites, and your test site is one of 7. And so that in itself is exciting, but you're here to share with us, Erin's going to share with us about BVLOS, the Chinese drones, and some of the things that they are doing to be proactive in this industry. So, Erin, I'm going to turn it over to you right away. I'll make you spotlight speaker. And if you could just kind of kick it off, you have an impressive bio, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me today. I'm happy to be here. My name's Erin Roesler. I am the Deputy Exec Director for the Northern Plains UAS test site. As you mentioned, that is one of 7 federal test sites here in the United States. The test site program, hard to believe, was founded 11 years ago now, with the mission to help integrate UAS into the national airspace. And I always say that that challenge that of integrating drones into the NAS should be done by now, right? I mean, 11 years later, you think, check the box, we're moving on, we're moving and grooving in commercial activity. But the reality is, and everyone on this call knows, it's so much more than just something you can solve quickly and easily. So, what we work on at the test site is never moving, never stopping, never ceasing. We're always trying to solve the next challenge, the next complexity, the next advancement in UAS integration. North Dakota, for those who are not familiar, we're a small state in the populous area, but has always been, a leader in aviation and in UAS. We're home to the University of North Dakota, which has the largest academic training program in the country for traditional aviation. And that program and the rich aviation history that North Dakota has really set the foundation for the state to consider pursuing the test site program. For those that are not aware, the test site program, while it was congressionally mandated, does not have any federal funding associated with it. So when of the 7 federal test sites, they need to seek alternative funding sources to, enable their operations. So here in North Dakota, that is through government appropriations at the state level. And in fact, the state is in session right now. We go through biennium. So every 2 years, we get to all travel to Bismarck and advocate and educate on the importance of UAS for North Dakota's economy. And that's exactly why North Dakota pursued the test site program 11 years ago. Was it looked at the ecosystem of the state of North Dakota, recognizing that we as a state were heavy in commodities, oil and agriculture in particular. Those commodities at the time were not doing so hot. So the state very strategically looked at opportunities to help diversify its economy. And again, looking to its rich aviation history, saw an opportunity to invest strategically in UAS. So I get to do I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So I'm a state of North Dakota employee, working in advancing all forms of UAS, whether that be federal, research projects, public, initiatives, as well as private companies, helping them integrate and advance their UAS activities, because we recognize as a state that this has immense indirect value that it brings back to the state. But then also we can take all those lessons learned and bring those up to the federal level as well, and really influence, rulemaking, decision-making, policy, standard development, discussions like this, and that we really do feel it is our duties as public servant to share the information and educate all forms of the public, again, private, public, and just the citizens alike, because we want to all see UAS as a successful industry together, and we can't do that alone. So North Dakota, like I said, has been in this space for 11 years now. It has led to so many opportunities, not just as a test site program, but as IPP partners of as well as a Beyond lead participant, continuing on in Beyond Phase 2 as a lead participant, working on other Pathfinder initiatives with the FAA Assure research projects, partnering with agencies in the broad area announcements, as well as then pursuing Vantis, which is the state of North Dakota's Beyond Visual Line of Sight infrastructure program, where we are developing out a shared use infrastructure model for UAS, because it doesn't currently exist. And that's probably the next challenge right behind policy and regulation, is the lack of shared infrastructure. So North Dakota has been working in that space for about 6 years now as well. So the list continues. I could go on and on about the test site and everything North Dakota is doing. But just as a high level overview, that's who I am. That's what I work on day in, day out. I'm love being here because I think this is truly what the test site mission is for, is to share and educate.
Well, that's fantastic. How exciting. And you've probably seen so much change over time and positive growth in that aspect as well. And you mentioned many different programs that maybe if you could share a little bit about some of those programs to give us that background. You mentioned the Beyond, the Pathfinder, IPP, all of those type of things. And those have all been stepping stones in opening doors to new things. Can you share a little bit about what those have been?
Yeah, definitely. So our approach in our partnership with the FAA has been that we can't isolate it to a single program or office of the FAA. We really have to be, widespread and diversify that engagement, because UAS, if we are going to be successful in this, we have to ensure every office really considers the implications of adding this new entrant into their policies and their procedures as well. So whether that be obviously the UAS integration office, but flight services, flight standards, air traffic control. So in the ATO office, then cybersecurity, a whole host of other aspects in that as well. So because of that, that has really motivated us as a test site to not just wait and only be a test site. So the test site program works heavily with the UAS integration office, again, under the auspices of helping advance UAS integration into the NAS. That program actually stood up before Part 107 was even a thing, which seems like forever ago. But when you say that was less than a decade ago, you forget what it was like to operate commercial UAS before Part 107, the whole realm of 333 exemptions and working in that space. But that's what the that's the environment that the test site program was stood up under, was still in that exemption and waiver standpoint, and needing a heavy reliance on those experts that could help navigate the complexity of commercial UAS regulations. So that was some of the first work that we did as a test site. Then through that led into the IPP, which was a presidential mandate program, and then into the Beyond program, which sought to add more complex operations and more advanced operations. But at this point, Part 107 had already come out, and the IPP really started tackling and recognizing that there needs to be this fine balance between federal rules, but also state, local, and tribal communities and regulations and rulemaking as well. And so the IPP was this delicate balance of trying to figure out how can we get these two to work together and not just come into the problem and say, well, federal preemption, the federal rule takes precedent over all the local rules. No, it's so much more of a complex issue. So the IPP program was an initiative and an opportunity for us to help strengthen the voice of those state, local, and tribal communities in their concerns, and then feed those lessons learned into the FAA as well. That continued on into the Beyond program. The Beyond program was really after beyond visual line of sight, right? And so that's the initiative of that program. So the first several years of that have been really working with the lead participants, which North Dakota is one, and key operators to find ways to get them to unlock beyond visual line of sight rules or operations for their companies, and then use those operations as a foundation to start influencing the next notice of proposed rule, right, which we're all eagerly anticipating and waiting for this year. And so now continuing on in Beyond Phase 2, we anticipate that will only continue to advance, because we know the next set of beyond visual line of sight, we're never going to cease to fill our appetite in integrating and advancing UAS. So we got to, small UAS, 55 pounds, great, box checked. What's more? What's next? So NUBO or Part 108, okay, that's going to be wonderful. It's going to be longer distances, higher altitudes, bigger aircraft. But then what's next? And so I think all these programs have been great evidence of the FAA tackling some of these different conversations and challenges. And then again, we as the public servants in this get to bring in all this wealth of information from operators, from state agencies, from communities, and bring those concerns into the FAA to really influence how they tackle the next challenge. Desi, you're on mute. Oh, good.
I have to unmute. So, as far as what you have done, I know all the states, and there are 7 different sites that are doing the program and such, but as far as community within the states, what are you seeing being done, and how has there been collaboration within the states?
Yeah, so I'll talk, what the state of North Dakota has done internal, but then I'll also talk about how we've been collaborating with other states as well. So internal to the state of North Dakota, we always, in fact, just did a webinar earlier this morning talking about the North Dakota UAS ecosystem. And ecosystem is a buzzword people throw out all the time. But the question really is what makes North Dakota unique? And to me, it boils down to the people. A lot of other states have 7 degrees of separation before you know someone in this space. In North Dakota, it's like 1 degree. So for me to be able to text our US senator and ask a question, or have him advocate for federal legislation, is unheard of for a lot of other states. But that's the kind of connectivity that North Dakota has in this space. And so what that means is we all bind together and come together to really support these UAS initiatives, because it all goes back to, we really feel we can help influence not only the diversity in the North Dakota economy, but also enabling innovation and integration of UAS into the national airspace. But we can't do that alone, because we are still a smaller state when it comes to populace. So how do we tackle it? How do we lead that? And so we work hand in hand, with our legislature, with the other major players in the space to really, again, to your point, that collaboration element. But the collaboration element doesn't come just internal to the state. And what I think from the perspective of the Northern Plains UAS test site, in the last 3 years, we have seen more and more states come to North Dakota or ask North Dakota, how are you successful in this space? How are you the leader? And how can I catch up? And it could be a conversation that gets perceived as competition, but North Dakota does not view it that way. We come into that conversation and go, how can we help you? How can we take our lessons learned and the investment that North Dakota has made in UAS and help other states? Because we recognize that this isn't just a challenge for North Dakota, this will be a challenge for every state. And we have a philosophy that all ships rise together, and that applies to UAS as well. And so if we find a way for states to collaborate and almost build a coalition in that standardization, that really will help the FAA and the federal government in their integration efforts as well, so that they're not trying to tackle 50 different challenges. They will have states coming together with solutions to help them solve the challenges. And we're now engaged with about a dozen different states that are really tackling that issue, in particular around UAS infrastructure, like programs like Vantas, and figuring out what does that model look like for UAS infrastructure that helps enable states to support their UAS ecosystems in their own state, but then also help influence a federal standard to set rules and policy and procedures for what does UAS infrastructure look like at the federal level as well.
And we do need those federal standards, and that collaboration is what it's going to take, where everyone is pulling together and creating something. So while we're kind of on the lines of that collaboration and such like that, bringing it into the smaller the companies working, not so much on the governmental side, but what are the companies doing? What are you seeing as far as people working together in the business side of things?
Yeah, so North Dakota, again, small economy here, but it's probably not recognized that we have some pretty big giants in the UAS space that have set up shop in North Dakota. General Atomics is one of them. They have, and they're actually moving all of their flight test and training centers to Grand Forks, North Dakota, because they found a way to do testing and training in a more efficient way because of our open airspace here than they have in other areas. But General Atomics, again, for the behemoth that it is in this space, is very accessible. They are there because they recognize that the community support, the public acceptance of flying UAS is very critical to enabling their operations. And so they're coming into academic classes at the university level, talking about what they're doing, talking about new research initiatives that they're taking on as a company. They're supporting, elementary, middle school programs to support, STEM. And you're seeing them look to other North Dakota businesses to help solve their challenges. An example of that is we have a company in Fargo, North Dakota that works on battery manufacturing, ways to produce more efficient and longer lasting lithium ion batteries, which are critical for the UAS industry, right? And so you take that component and you engage with that company, and that company, Packet Digital, and they have a couple other sister companies with them, work really closely with a lot of the UAS companies that are in the state as well. One of the other big advantages that we have here in North Dakota is we actually have a UAS, like tech incubator. It's called the Hive, and it's in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and it's literally a UAS focused tech accelerator, tech incubator for these startup companies. So the tenants of that facility are all UAS related. Again, whether it's in battery manufacturing, whether it's in aircraft design, whether it's in operations, whether it's in payloads. We also have radar manufacturers, system integrators, system engineers, all having offices in a singular location. And what that enables is communication. Just like today, communication is key to helping solve and tackle these challenges, adding in diversity in viewpoints and perspectives. And it sounds weird to say that it takes four walls and a roof in this very digital environment, but that has been so true for the success of that facility, because you're seeing all these small startup companies that might not have otherwise made these connections, but they're office neighbors to someone next door that is also trying to solve that challenge, and that really enables them to help in that collaboration.
Wow, that is excellent. And just bringing everybody together and being able to just network and communicate that way is fantastic. So I would like to segue over to the article that you wrote that has been published recently, and I'll put a link into our chat about it. But can you tell us a little bit about the article that you have put out?
Yeah, so we started by titling it just the China question, because it is a question I think everyone has faced in some capacity in the last couple of years here. And it's acknowledging that the largest manufacturer of commercial and consumer UAS or drones in the United States right now is of Chinese origin, largely DJI and Altel. And that has raised some questions about the security implications of that. Some of those security implications are regarding just the data side of things, right? So the drones are collecting data of various sorts, and they're being stored either locally or in servers. And there's some uncertainty around where does that data go? Does that data go back to China, in which a foreign adversary might have an opportunity to exploit it and use it against the United States. That's one concern in this larger question. The other concern is the operational vulnerabilities. Because these products have such a large market share, projected somewhere between 70 on the upward side of 80% of the commercial UAS that are out there today. What happens if tomorrow, those companies push a software update, as they do, and that renders those drones inoperable? And what if that foreign adversary uses that at a time when the country is vulnerable? Especially if those drones are being leveraged by state agencies, or public safety entities, or emergency response efforts, because that can then be another exploitation where, again, that in this case, China can take advantage of disabling a majority of the UAS fleet that is in the U.S. and having a number of agencies not able to leverage the tools that are in their toolbox to respond to whatever event is unfolding. Those are our risks, our threats. Are those threats great enough to change, how we do business in UAS? I'm not the one to say definitively yes or no, but this conversation is happening, and it's happening at the state level and it's happening at the federal level. And what we've seen is federal bans that are starting to come out as a result of these concerns around, again, the security, but also the operational vulnerabilities that having these drones have in the United States. So you see these bans happen through the NDAA, as well as the American Drones Act, that propose different either bans or disqualifications of federal funding should entities continue to utilize or either purchase or operate in conjunction with their operations, which then brings up another risk. If I am a state agency that does receive federal funds, and I got this wonderful, powerful drone that helps me do my job better and do my public mission, I risk my receiving federal funding or federal aid if I continue to use that drone. And that's a hard dilemma to put up against a state agency, especially some of the state agencies that are smaller, that maybe don't have as big of national security type governmental functions. One example would be like the National Forestry Service, or State Forestry Service. So here in North Dakota, our state foresters do leverage DJI products, or have been leveraging DJI products for a number of years. But if they continue to operate them, that will put at risk the federal funding that they receive. And to them, even though that drone is a really powerful tool in the toolbox, they're not using them anymore. They put them on the shelf because they don't want to risk the hundreds of millions of dollars that they seek in federal aid to support their jobs. That is a dilemma that is very difficult to face from those agencies' perspectives. So whether or not there are security or operational vulnerabilities, the potential disqualification of federal funding is the other threat that comes to entities at the state level. And so again, those are those federal bans that are coming out. And so as a response to that, you're now seeing states take different actions in this as well. Florida had some legislation in the last couple of years that supplied funding. So they not only had a statewide ban that their government agencies cannot leverage, again, Chinese products or non-NDAA compliant products for their governmental functions anymore, but then they also supplied funding to support law enforcement to replace their drones with NDAA compliant drones, so American made or trusted countries alternatives. which is good. But again, it really forced people into a predicament that's challenged. Because what I will say, as being in this space every day, buying American made or buying non-China drones is easier said than done. And I would bet most of you on this call would agree that it is extremely hard to procure something that it would be NDAA compliant, either because of the cost, which is probably the biggest barrier, is they're expensive products still today, but also just the community support, supply chain, getting parts, getting replacements. We've operated products that would be or could be NDAA compliant. And while the aircraft itself was great, the timelines to get replacement pieces were just not the same. And that creates a, operational challenge for us as an entity to plan ahead, to have maybe more spares in stock, in supply, to not risk not being operational because we're waiting for, a 2-month lead time to get a replacement part. DJI doesn't have that challenge. The other challenge is just the community support. If I have a DJI drone and it's not working or something's going wonky on it, I get to Google the answer, right? And there are probably 50,000 blogs out there that have talked about other users that have had this challenge, and they walk you through the steps to solve the issue. If I have an American made product, I don't have that same community user group that is easily accessible on the internet to help me solve that challenge. That's another aspect to all of this that, again, is really easy to say, don't buy China, but it's a lot harder to do in practice.
Very, very valid points. Very valid, yes. And it's funny that you had mentioned, they just push out a firmware and things are changing. And that's literally what just happened. And so I even saw over in our chat, excuse me, that there was conversation about that firmware. You mentioned also about the funding and such and being available. How do you feel, or what are you seeing for promoting that American made drone? What can manufacturers look for to promote that side of things and get that funding gap and such like that? What are you seeing for where you are at?
Yeah, so to date, there hasn't been a lot of aid for the manufacturers. We've seen things like the CHIPS Act and a few other things that have helped really, secure and solidify the American supply chain. But it's not enough. This industry is still supply and demand. And right now, the demand is the minority on American made products. We're hoping that there are ways to help encourage a higher demand for those products, which is the approach and the stance that North Dakota is taking. So North Dakota did propose legislation on this issue, right? So it's locally, if you want to track it, it's House Bill 1038. It's called the Drone Buyback Program. And it's not a ban. It is a proactive measure where this proposed funding would be $15 million available to state agencies to procure alternative products. And we're hoping that then alleviates the kind of the financial burden that state agencies might face in replacing their products, and hopefully augment the demand for American made or again NDAA compliant alternatives. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take years to build up and grow, because it's not just that the US is behind. We are generations behind in technology. So you talk about life cycles of technology, your phones, your computers, things like that. They have different generations. DJI products are 3, 4, 5 generations ahead of American made alternatives, which means they're just that much more mature in solving those bugs, creating more user-friendly interfaces, and making it just that much easier to adopt those NDAA compliant products. So it's going to take time. It really will just take time. And I think more and more states can keep encouraging through the financial investment to at least alleviate that burden. Again, North Dakota is looking at it just from a state perspective because it's really looking at the challenge. And again, this China question of where do these security threats really have some risk? And it is probably in those governmental functions, those state agency aspects. Go back into the operational vulnerability. If my law enforcement can't operate their drone, that has a very different threat than if a wedding photographer can't use a drone for wedding photography on the weekend. So there's a line somewhere there that we can find alternatives in some areas, but potentially we don't need to find alternatives in other industries because there just really isn't as great of a threat if those drones were either disabled or have data security risks.
And what are you seeing from your perspective, how companies are moving forward to mitigate the risks? Well, what type of challenges have they overcome and what type of positive things have they done?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have a positive one to start with, but I'll get to some positive. Unfortunately, I think the biggest thing I've seen agencies of late do is just not get into the UAS space. I'm hearing more and more public safety entities that are becoming educated on this topic that do not want to invest, their precious allocated dollars on, a Chinese product that they think will become obsolete in a couple years. And they don't have the funding to procure an alternative. So rather than procure anything, they're just not leveraging drones, which is a very sad story because, again, we all know how powerful of tools they can be. But I think what we're seeing, again, is those agencies rising together and bringing a voice to this concern, educating the public, talking about it, talking about how, like, in this area, I mean, we have products every day that are made in China. This one is a little bit unique. And so let's talk about that because it's not an easy concept to understand. And the more, they're all coming together. And I think that's, again, going back to some of our earlier talks about the positive aspects of this collaboration, working together, educating, and continuing to talk about the question because it's not an easy answer. The bill that we have here in North Dakota is not going to solve it. We need to have conversations like we're having here today. We need to have conversations at the federal level, the local level, the state level, and all of the above in order for us to find a solution that's really going to move us forward together as an entire country. Unmute again. Yep, there you go. You got it.
I'm running all the things behind the scenes, so I'm sorry if I'm not quick on that, quick on the draw, right? Really quick, like I want to make sure that people are aware that the chat's open. There's been a lot of conversation over here in the chat. Again, about, the update that they just did, moving forward and conversations that way. And then if you have any questions for Erin, that's a good time to ask them. She is a wealth of knowledge, and I just love what we're hearing that North Dakota is doing and the collaboration that you're having. And I know this is going to take us down a rabbit hole, a different direction, but over the course, because it has been building and it's hard to look back at so many years, like you mentioned in the beginning, what has been the most monumental change that you have seen?
I think the most monumental change has been in the attitude towards drones and UAS. I vividly remember, and this was before I was within the test site programs, I vividly remember that Part 107 had come out, and there was a very strong viewpoint that the test site program would then sunset and be obsolete because we solved the challenges. Part 107 came out. There's rules for UAS. We've solved the problem. But I don't think that I have not heard that sentiment in many years now because it's acknowledging that there's so much work to do in this space to truly integrate UAS into the NAS. and we're taking it, you know, chunk at a time, chunk at a time, chunk at a time. But the mentality that we're going to be done anytime soon is nowhere in sight. And I think that has been the biggest shift and change that I've seen over the last, you know, 11, 12 years. Muted again.
Got
There
it.
you
Yeah. It does take me a sec, but I got it,
Okay.
I got it down. No problem. There's been more comments and questions into the chat there. I think one of the biggest things that you really touched on was that, you know, all these public entities, they don't want to now invest in what is an excellent tool for them and for safety reasons as well, and yet they're going to lose that funding over it. Are you seeing any other options coming through yet, or are we just still working to see that come through?
Yeah, the scenario at the moment is a unfortunate one where the change in the language at the federal level isn't just a, you know, ban on procuring non-NDAA compliance with Chinese drones with federal funding, but it's also the operation in conjunction with. And the scenario I give on this is a bleak one. I talk about how, I mean, the wildfires out west, emergency response starts at the local level. The first ones to respond to that fire when it started were the very local first responders, police, and firefighters. And they didn't know how big it's going to go and how big of a disaster could unfold. So they're going to grab every tool in their toolbox, and hopefully it's a drone to help in that scenario as well, to respond to that emergency. But as we see with particular natural disasters, as the disasters unfold, there is this potential that they escalate up to the regional level, up to the state level, in which case, you know, a state emergency is declared. And that's important because then that typically unlocks accessibility into federal funds, FEMA funds, that help cover the costs that the state is bearing to respond to that emergency. And that's really vital, you know, when we're looking at those scenarios, because you don't want a state ever to only respond because they're limited by their resources. But those FEMA funds are now at risk if a non-NDAA compliant, you know, drone was used anywhere in that emergency response process. And that's a huge threat. And so what I fear personally is kind of two scenarios. But on the first side is you have a, you know, local law enforcement or first responder that's educated enough on NDAA rules, and they know that when they respond to that fire, if they grab the Mavic that's in the back of their squad car, that's going to make, you know, FEMA funds potentially at risk. And so instead of doing that, they're not going to grab that tool. They're not going to grab the powerful tool that's in their toolbox and use it in that scenario. Or alternatively, a law enforcement is not going to be educated on the topic, is going to leverage that tool, and then have a scenario where that does disqualify an emergency from receiving federal funds. And now those citizens are the ones that are taking the brunt of that because they're not seeking and not receiving the federal aid to support their communities and building back and coming back. And that, again, is the second half of that risk. That's my biggest fear in all of this. It's a scenario that I hope through either changes in the federal level, maybe changes in the UAS market in the industry, and we see more alternatives to DJI products come into the market and can be equally capable comparisons at a good price point. But we're just not there today, which again is why this conversation is so important, because all the comments that people have had in the chat about all those different challenges in here only underscore why this is such a complex topic.
It is very complex, yes. So what do you offer as far as some educational outreaches? What is North Dakota doing as far as, like you mentioned, educating, you know, public safety? What are some of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, so conversations like this, we hold conversations with our own monthly webinars, and then we've had a lot of roundtables. Inviting people to come to the table, to ask their questions, to make our expertise accessible. I think that's important. That we come to them when they're available. So for example, we'll be having a roundtable this Friday with all our state cabinet agencies. We had a roundtable in the past with all our public safety entities. So that means from the local volunteer public safety emergency response all the way up to the state highway patrol, getting them all in the room because they all have a similar shared mission set of protecting the public. But they all have this challenge in front of them, and maybe not even a China question, just, hey, I know drones can be a very powerful tool. Where do I even start? And we can sit there and answer those questions, give them the expertise, and then guide them along the process. That's the beauty about being the government agency that I am. That's part of our mission as well, is help foster and enable those state agencies to leverage this tool and do more, as part of their governmental function.
Awesome. Great ways to outreach, and
Yeah.
hopefully it expands well beyond just the local, and it can have collaboration with other states as well, and grow from there. So I know we're getting up towards the top, and so if you could just kind of recap some of the solutions that are being seen throughout your test center, and we'll end it on a positive note of looking forward and some of the great solutions that have come across.
Yeah. So I'll set aside the China question, but I think some of the greatest solutions that we've seen in North Dakota has been the approach to shared use infrastructure to support UAS. And I talked about this briefly kind of at the beginning, but I think it's really the successful win that's going to help enable the entire UAS industry to move to the next complex and advanced operations. We always feel that the largest barriers that UAS has, and most of us will raise our hand, the biggest barriers we have is policy and regulation. If we had policy and regulation that allowed us to do more, to go higher, to go farther, to have heavier drones, that would be wonderful. But we strongly feel the second greatest barrier right behind that is the lack of shared infrastructure. UAS is really the only section in the entire transportation sector that does not get to benefit from shared use infrastructure. We have railroads, we have roadways, we have air traffic control systems, we have airports that support commercial aviation and private aviation today, but that's not the infrastructure that UAS needs. And so what we find is agencies and companies and entities are in positions where they're often left to develop their own infrastructure solutions, which is costly because it's redundant, it's inefficient, and it creates these huge barriers to entry and stifles the economic development that states are trying to encourage. And so this was the challenge, and this was the environment that North Dakota saw about 6 years ago now. And we went to the governor at the time and said, look, if North Dakota wants to continue to lead in UAS, we have to find a way to solve the lack of shared infrastructure. So it started out as a program that was called the Statewide Network. But very quickly into the program, we realized it was so much more than traditional infrastructure. It was demand generation, it was education, it was outreach, it was policy and regulatory development. It was developing standards. It was trying to solve something that has never been solved before. And so because of that, to really embrace that it was so much more than just a network, it got branded Vantis because it encompasses all of those things. And it allows us to collaborate at the federal level, at the state to state level, at the community and local level. But at its core, it is still shared infrastructure, where it is finding a way to bring a C2 solution, communications, and surveillance, whether it be ground-based or airborne, to ensure that whether a drone is flying 5, 50, or 500 miles, that it has that radio connectivity to complete that mission, but then also that the airspace is clear around it, that the drone isn't going to be a threat to the safety and efficiency of our national airspace as it exists today. And so that I think I'm most proud of is seeing how North Dakota's continued to work and lead that in that space, to bring this next evolution of aviation infrastructure. And we really do feel Vantas is that blueprint that can be leveraged. It was designed to be technology agnostic, to look at functions and capabilities that UAS would need, whether it's a small UAS privately owned, all the way up to our largest, DoD-like operators that are flying up in the flight levels. Look at all of those gamut and how can we build an infrastructure model that supports them? And then how can we collaborate with other states to help expand this model and then set a federal standard?
That is such a fantastic, for one, way to wrap up our session, because it is impactful, that sharing and that collaboration. I've seen it over the years where we're starting to see a little bit more of that collaboration, but that together we have to build that. We have to share that and get that foundation. And so that's excellent that it's moving forward and it's positive. Feels good to know that it is moving forward and there's a collaboration with other states and such like that. So I'm going to wrap it up on that, because it's just an excellent way for us to think about moving forward in our own lives, what we can all do and collaborate with other industries and such like that. So love the networking, love all the information that you have provided, Erin. Thank you for that insight. It's not just talking about Chinese drones, but it's talking about how we can all collaborate to make this industry move forward. And I love to see what you are doing in North Dakota. That is excellent. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'd like to thank everyone else for joining us today on this Tuesday, not necessarily a Tuesday morning for everyone. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. And thank you for everyone that contributed in the chat. I think that was a great dialogue to just show that we have to have more sessions like these to encourage collaboration.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, everybody have a great day and thank you very much.
Thanks, Erin. Great
Thank
session.
you.
All right. Bye.